All right, so I am here today with Nicole Miles, and I found out about her project. And of course, I was a big supporter of it. And I want to tell all of you about it because this is a time sensitive request. And so let's dig in so you can find out a little bit more about what she is doing. So uh, take it away, Nicole. Tell me about your project.
Well, thank you so much, Kate, for doing all of this. I'm so excited about this little project. You and I know each other from the coaching and consulting space, but I have an alter ego, so to speak. And her name is Nicki Scribbles, and it's a place where I do a lot of artwork. And what I have found is that in my consulting work, which is around trauma-informed practices and helping people recover and heal from trauma, and this artwork space, that there's this beautiful overlap in the expressive arts and how we can really work to learn how to express those emotions, which is something that a lot of us didn't get to do as children. And in the way back days, before my consulting days, I was an educator and I was an arts educator. So I got to see firsthand the impact of the arts. And through some conversations with people like you and others, I decided it was time to write a children's book. And it is named after my alter ego. It's Nicki Scribbles. But Scribbles is the verb in this case. And so this book is actually about using expressive arts, using drawing and the act of simply scribbling to get in touch with our emotions for young children. So this is a picture book for 4 to 8-year-olds, which is kind of that heart of picture book reading when we love to do that. I remember doing that with my own children and how they soaked all those up. But the story is about Nicki and her friends and how they learn how to process their emotions through something as simple as scribbling.
Awesome. You are so multi-talented, and I love that about you because you can be really super competent in one area and then another area and then another area. So I absolutely love that you have followed your passions. And I'm curious, what inspired you to create Nikki Scribbles?
It's so interesting because I have said this is my work meets my work meets my work. um, I was originally an educator and an arts educator. And then I became a nonprofit executive, and I worked also in the informal education space with children in children's museums and also in science centers, and moved into this trauma informed space. And really, the inspiration comes back to something I've always held true to, which even though I'm an interventionist by trade, effectively, I get involved with people to try to change things. I truly believe in prevention first.
Mhm.
And every single time I get to something like expressive arts, handling our traumas, processing what's happening, I think about what would have happened if we had these skills at the beginning. And so this little story um, kind of manifested itself out of conversations about that. What would happen if? What if we could prevent the kind of work, the need for the kind of work that I'm doing now? What if we could really change that trajectory so that there were so many less people who needed it? And I was a kid who really needed this. Anybody who visits my campaign site will get to what I mean when I say campaign site. We'll see a video of me making the confession that, in fact, my name is Nicole, but growing up, people called me Nicki, and I actually never liked that name. Not even a little bit. And people today still call me Nicki. And the reason that they do is because I never corrected them. I didn't have the voice. I didn't have the ability to express myself in a comfortable way. I hadn't learned that that uncomfortable feeling had a space, that I could express it and that I could correct people without, feeling like I was inconveniencing them or doing something else. And while a name isn't necessarily a little thing, but it's just one thing, that really blossomed into a lot of other things I didn't correct people on, a lot of other discomforts that I accepted over time. And so when I think about this book, I think about the idea of giving children that voice to take that little step because that little step is really, it's the pebble in the ocean, isn't it? It's going to make that wave throughout their lives.
Oh, I'm such a softie. Like I'm tearing up right now because I think, that is something I totally connect with growing up. We didn't talk about emotions. We didn't name emotions. There wasn't ways to express them, although, anger, lashing out, misbehavior, right? So
Mm-hmm.
behavior is communication. We can learn that from becoming trauma informed, is that, we're protecting ourselves, we're doing what we need to do in the moment, but how much more powerful is it if you can be proactive and learn that from a young age?
Right. I mean, that's something that we're starting to see some inroads in that in social emotional learning. And the timing of this, I'm going to give to the universe at this point that, quite literally the manuscript for this book landed on me in the middle of several other projects that were writing and big and heady. And suddenly I was like, nope, we're writing this picture book over here instead. So I believe it arrived to me when it did, because it was supposed to. Because we are seeing this kind of crisis. Well, there were so many of us growing up that didn't get that information early on. We are now seeing an amplified version of that in our communities because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are young children, you think about that age group, 4 to 8, those children were 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 years old when the pandemic started. They were in those really formative early social emotional learning, collaborative learning times, and they weren't able to get it. And so even though we know that we've always had problems in that area, in the state I live in, our counties, the Tri-County area here, 60% of our kindergartners weren't coming to school socially and emotionally ready for school um, before COVID. So those numbers are really amplified.
Mhm.
And I think it's so important that we make space for that, but that we also understand, I have visions of this book being in the hands, certainly of caregivers and parents, but also of educators and therapists and people who are working actively with children in a way that it's layered so that they're not having to sacrifice other skills these children need, like early reading skills, vocabulary skills, and they can see easy ways to overlap those social emotional skills for these kiddos so that they're getting that voice and getting that space. Um, Developmentally, kids don't even have language, right, for a lot
Right.
of these feelings that they're having. That's why you see anger. We have that one. We come kind of preloaded, right, with with these basic emotions. But I was fascinated when I started really looking at this work. I've been fascinated with expressive arts and neuroaesthetics for a long, long time. That children in early childhood who engage in this kind of work, engage in this kind of regulation, um, have lower levels of anxiety, and they have lower levels of aggression. So they are finding other ways to process those emotions other than internally or externally, like a lot of us did.
That's incredible. So you're saying that just by like literally scribbling,
Scribbling.
just by using color and random or drawing, realistically or not, or shapes, that
Right.
we can express things that maybe our words can't quite capture, or we don't aren't quite connected with.
That's right. That's right. Emotions are so personal
Hmm.
and often so jumbled up. I actually use that phrase in Nicki's world, that she has this kind of lousy morning and then she's feeling jumbled up inside her stomach. How these things manifest in our bodies, that what we call somatically.
Hmm.
We see kids with that as well. Remember those kids, or maybe you were a kid who
Yeah.
constantly had
Stomach
a
aches.
stomach ache,
Yeah.
or you
Headache.
had headaches. Right, right. All of these things that really are our emotions being pent up. Those are bad for our long-term physical health and our mental health. And it turns out that, right, talking isn't always, for some people, talking is a great way to be able to release those emotions. But for a lot of people, and especially for a lot of children, they don't have that language. They're not aware. So being able to do something as comfortable and accessible as scribbling as doodling is putting something down, yes, that's real or that's not,
Mhm.
can really be a release point.
Mm.
And when you're working with children, whether it's your own children or children in your school space or therapeutic space, asking them then to tell about that scribble is really revealing. And that's kind of the next little layer that happens. So with Nicki Scribbles, with the book, we're encouraging how to frame up this skill for
Mhm.
children, how to help them be able to express it, and what those very simple and accessible tools are for them to be able to do it. And then there's going to be some follow-up information, some supports for how to ask the right kind of questions. I have had both gut-wrenching, heartbreaking conversations with little children over what they've drawn, and also some of the most hysterical and just warm and wonderful conversations with little children, by asking these right kind of questions, these open-ended type of questions. And so there's a little bit of guidance in the book for that. The book itself is open-ended, in particularly in the illustrations.
I was
So in
gonna ask
addition,
you about that. Like you use watercolor as the medium, and what's the reason behind that?
yeah, so well, the reason for the watercolor is actually because I'm the illustrator of the book, and watercolors are presently my main medium of using, of expressing my own self, actually, and working through my own emotions. Watercolor is a great way for me to ground myself and process what's happening and get focused. And so I am creating the illustrations for this book myself. And the reason for that is really, when you write a book, if you submit it to a publisher, they choose the illustrator. They work with illustrators, and those illustrators work together with the publisher to formulate the vision. But when this book came to me, it kind of came to me as the whole package. The manuscript came, but also the vision for what these pages looked like came to me. And part of that is that the book is open-ended. So you see parts of the environment that Nicki and her friends are in. You see parts of characters, but you never see the whole of anybody or anything. And the intentional reason for that is that I want the children who are reading this book to place themselves inside the story. And if I give too much of an environment that they can't relate to, then it will be hard for them to place themselves there. So I've left out a lot of information and put in enough that the children can relate to it. We know that young children don't think abstractly particularly well, and yet can dictate their feelings. So there's a really unique balance there. And I felt like I wanted to make sure that that all got conveyed. So I committed to not only being the author, but the illustrator of this book, which has been an incredible journey in and of itself, to think about and remember what it's like to look at things from a child's perspective, what parts of children we get to see. I make a reference to that tummy feeling, but also Nicki talks about how that makes her toes curl up. And so I was finding reference photos of, little children's shoes and pants and kind of what that all looks like when they're there. And so I think that that warmth and connection, is part of what I'm really going for with this story, also, that they can see themselves in it, and that the adults working with them can kind of also get that reminder of
Mhm.
how children do see the world and what it does look like to be part of this kind of a world.
Yeah. Yes. So definitely that idea that the adults will benefit from reading this book
Yes.
has crossed my mind. But the other thing is, so I have a master's in English literature, and I've done creative writing, and I absolutely am in awe of your illustrations. They're so powerful. They're simple, but like they kind of bring you into a different world. So kudos on that. But what struck me, because I did get to have a preview of your book, what struck me is how well you're able to inhabit the viewpoint of the child. Because one of the primary mistakes I see people who write a children's book make, who are new to that process. Of course, you've got lots of background in education, so you maybe know better than do with this, but I see the mistake in those children's books as being, this is somebody's going to come in and teach the kids a lesson. But the number one thing about writing a children's book is that the child is the hero. It's the
Right.
child's journey. And you so beautifully capture it down to even the language. I think you said something about the Dolch words. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. So
Like, I'd never heard about that. Like, what is Dolch words?
when we are teaching children to read, right, there's a window here where we are teaching children to read, and then we want to make that switch to read to learn. And part of that journey is about Dolch words, or commonly known as sight words. Maybe that's a phrase you've heard a lot of, right? So when we're teaching children to read, we teach them certain words that we just want them to recognize instead of having to stop and sound out. We want them to know these words and they flow through conversation easily. These are words that we also use in our early conversations with children. And they are words, therefore, that children frequently use themselves back out. And so when I built the story, I started looking at those words years and years and years ago, post teaching. But when I was in my first museum role, I was asked to build an environment for children under 10 inside of a natural history museum. And so in a natural history museum, we have these things called didactics. This is the signs that are everywhere, and there are rules for didactics. And if you've ever read a didactic, it's not compelling reading. Let's just be very honest. It's generally not compelling reading. The field is getting much, much better at putting some really entertaining little snippets in there and bringing personality into it. But if you are in a museum that hasn't been updated in a few decades, that reading is just not compelling. And so here we were in this space trying to figure out how we were going to get children to independently interact in it and use didactic labeling so they would understand what was in the space. And I started doing this research on sight words, Dolch words, and I ended up writing inside that space everything based on these sight words with only a few vocabulary words. And those were the new words we really wanted children to latch onto. And that model became the model for the way I used for anything else that I was doing going forward that had to do with children. And that's really what informed this book as well, is there are vocabulary words inside this book. Certainly scribbling is not, right? Emotion or feeling is not a Dolch word. There is a substitute teacher inside this book, and the word substitute is not a Dolch word, but the rest of that language that kind of packs around it are those simple sight words. They are those words children relate to easily. And so it is, I've seen that also where I've come across some really compelling, wonderful concept of children's books. And then you open them up and they're really just adult books shrunk down to little people. And while I've been fond in my career of calling children the tiny humans, because that is in fact what they are, the brain development requires that we do something different if we want to connect with them and speak their language. And so it is their book, you're right. It's for them, and it's for them to connect to. So it has to speak their language.
So your book, Nicki Scribbles, is a very classic children's book, meaning it's a simple concept. It's fun to read. It's fun to look at. It's definitely drawing the kids into the world, but it's built on these bigger ideas of helping kids have language, to communicate, to grow and express themselves and feel like they have an important part in this world. So that is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this book. And I really see its potential in so many different places, schools, homes, cancer treatment hospitals, children's homes. There's just an endless array of things there where this should be seen. So I have a couple of final questions for you. One is, what happens when kids don't know that they can express themselves or don't know how to express themselves?
Yeah, so everything finds its way, right? Eventually, children are going to express themselves, but that may be in ways we don't really want them to or aren't socially acceptable ways. It really can manifest in a lot of those aggressive issues, anger issues, behavioral issues, oversensitivity, crying, these kinds of things that it's not to say that no one should ever feel angry or no one should be crying. There are very good reasons to do that in our lives, and children have the right to do that as well. But when that kind of explosion of emotion, that pent up and explosion becomes their pattern, they lose the ability to really interpret for themselves what's happening. They're not in control of those emotions very frequently. And you see these kind of brilliant examples of children who have had these skills kind of tapped in for them, where you'll see a kiddo, very little, 4 or 5 years old, who's crying and upset, and then will be able to verbalize, my feelings have been hurt because I wanted to play with that and he took it from me and now I'm feeling really sad. That level of empowerment, we can help children maintain that level of empowerment. I know what I'm feeling. I have these feelings. I'm not diminishing these feelings. And here's why I'm having them. That creates a really healthy adult, older child, adolescent, and adult. Like that really can last. When we don't offer that as an option, when we teach kids that they don't talk about their feelings, that they don't get to express them, that they're not valid, we start to see other behavioral issues. We start to see things manifest in really negative ways socially and also for children, right? Some children don't, I always say I wasn't a problem child at all. In fact, I was a very well behaved kiddo, but not always very happy about the level of behavior that I was exhibiting. And so it took a long time. We may not see it right away, right? There are those kiddos who get pent up and you're seeing that as behavioral issues when they're little, 6, 7, 8 years old. And then there are some of us who, as adults, grow up and realize that we had no idea how to feel what we were feeling or how to process what we were feeling. And we've made a series of decisions without ever listening to what our own needs were. And some of those decisions can be really deeply impactful in negative ways. And so I think that, I do think it's a fun book. It's a light book with a topic that can be heavy, but doesn't have to be. And it offers this kind of easily accessible, fun way to begin to have this conversation and get comfortable with it for adults who may not have been comfortable with it themselves, and also for children early on. But it's kind of got this vision of hope towards it, right? I'm trying to turn a trajectory today that I may not know the results of for 20 or 30 years, right? And it's one of those things you can't really prove a negative. So healthy children should become healthy adolescents and should become healthy adults. And if we change that, we change a path and create more of those kids, we won't necessarily ever know that what exactly it was that did those things. But we build this on faith and we build it on, solid research also that is out there. We know that these kinds of arts approaches are great for the brain. They're great for our mental health, for our wellness always. And so I love the idea that there are kiddos, much like I think about now from my teaching years, that it's been years and a couple of decades now since I was really teaching in a classroom, that there are children that I got to influence, that walk around and have a moment of remembering what it was like to be in my class. I think the book has that kind of same impact or potential impact, where someday, right, somebody's getting upset and they're drawing, they're journaling, they're doing something else. And maybe there'll be subsequent books with other kiddos or with Nicki herself to do other things, because there's lots of great expressive arts ways to process our emotions. Drawing, doodling, scribbling is one of them, but There's lots of music and movement and other things that we can do. And so I'm really hoping at the end there's a battery of these options for kids so that they also learn not only that they are empowered to share their emotions and process them, but that they have this whole smorgasbord of beautiful ways to do it and they can find their own.
Well, Nicole, I'm going to make a bold statement here and say that your book, Nicki Scribbles, needs to be in every child's hand, and that anyone who's watching this is able to support that by helping with the crowdfunding of the actual production of the book so that it can get out there. And so I'm going to challenge those who are watching to contribute at, there's lots of different levels for
Mhm.
this particular thing. And if you're watching this, once it's been launched, I want you to go out and buy that book. But first, tell us, Nicole, how can people support you with this
Wonderful
book?
question. I'm so glad you asked. So there is an Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign for this book. I am doing writing the illustrations. I have some friends who are helping to edit, but I'm also doing all the formatting and things. And the reason for that is really to make sure that I keep the whole vision of the book. But that meant that I couldn't go through a traditional publisher. I have to self-publish, and that's a fairly costly experience if we're going to do a high quality hardcover children's book, which is what I think children deserve. And so there's an open crowdfunding campaign. We'll put the link with everything we share here. You can go to Indiegogo, and there are all kinds of things, ways to support from $10 all the way up to 2,500. You can be a leader in this. If you are at those top levels, you'll be able to help direct where the first books go. So there'll be two ways to access the book at the end of the campaign. There's going to be 1,000 hardcover copies, the first 1,000 that will be generated here, 300 of which I want to put into the hands of under-resourced schools, programs, libraries, etc. And then there will also hopefully be what's known as a KDP, or a digital version of the book, where you can buy a print on demand version of that book. And so both of those have unique formats. And we're going to work on both, getting both launched. So you can support and get early access to the orders and a little discount, or you can move yourself all the way through being lead on my PR and getting lots and lots of attention and love and everything in between, including some fun scribble packs. I want to make sure that I give lots of love to the people who support this program and support this project, because I am optimistic that it will stand on its own 2 feet after we get this initial run done. It feels like it has that potential, so I just need to get out there and do that. And if financial wherewithal is not within your reach right now, but you still care about the project, then I just ask that people share the project, share what I'm trying to do, have conversations, ask me questions. I'd be happy to answer them and talk folks through it.
Awesome. If you have a child that you love in your life, support this project. I'm absolutely a big believer, and I think you are have brought something amazing into the world and that it gets to spread around. So thanks for talking with me today, Nicole. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Kate. It's always fun.
Yeah. Bye.